Welcome to Dig List, a podcast by Quarry. Today we're going to be talking about Guernsey's workforce, the challenges it's faced, and the solutions that we could see for those challenges. With me today, we've got Korinne, Leyla, and Blair.
Hello.
All coming at this from a different perspective and different experiences. But I think we'd like to start back in July. Really, it was when PwC released their workforce report, wasn't it? And there's some real key messages in there, and almost a wake-up call, I think.
Yeah, I mean, look, what we consistently see, we do an annual CEO survey across the islands. We've just released the second one, and the CEOs consistently telling us that skills and access to skills is the biggest inhibitor to their growth ambitions. We know how difficult it is to attract and recruit and retain people on island, and that's becoming a really big barrier to growth. And I guess our report was kind of setting out the hypothesis that actually we have a huge opportunity to boost our workforce if we were able to increase the participation rates of the islanders who are already here.
So was the report telling us anything about why we have maybe a problem with participation and which sectors that affects or demographically?
Yeah, look, there are lots of reasons. There's no kind of single reason for it. We're seeing, certainly since COVID, an increase in people retiring early. So we've got people kind of in their 50s, early 50s, choosing to give up work. We've got a relatively good participation rate of women in the workforce, however, not as high as other parts of the world. And we know that things like cost of childcare are a real inhibitor to women coming back to work full-time in particular. And then we've got, other factors like employers and how flexible are they willing to be in terms of offering part-time hours and more kind of flexible ways of working, which potentially women returners and older workers might be looking for. So I think there's no kind of singular, area, demographic, industry. It's kind of multiple factors, but it's got us to a position where in terms of those participation rates, we're just not as good as many other countries around the world.
And I guess that's an increasingly important issue as you get an ageing demographic and what that means for your tax base and your revenues and the islands as a whole.
That's absolutely right. So we've got a rapidly ageing population here in Guernsey. We have a birth rate of around 1.3 children per woman. You need a birth rate of 2.1 just to maintain the size of the population. And people living longer. So what we're likely to see as time goes on is a much larger proportion of our population being in that 60, 65 plus category and far fewer people of working age. And that's even if we continue with the current strategy of 300 net increase in population a year. Even if we do that to 2040, we will still have less workers than we have currently today. And our report is saying basically if we were able to match participation rates of places like New Zealand, Iceland, we could significantly add the number of working people in our island, and that could have a dramatic impact on our GVA and the tax take for the island.
There were some big figures in that as well.
There was, and if you forget, I'm just going to kind of look at my notes so I don't get this wrong. So if we match New Zealand, we could have an additional 4,500 employees in Guernsey. Remember, these are people that already live here, so they're not arriving to the island. They don't need housing because they're already here. That would equate to around £400 million a year in GVA, and the tax take of that is £89 million a year. So pretty significant.
What response did you have to that report coming out? Because to me, those figures are really quite startling, and the opportunity seems massive. So,
yeah, it's a really good question. So I think people surprised, really interested, but I think the frustration is that who owns this? Who owns this? So whose responsibility is it to get the people of Guernsey working for longer? And look, there are many people who choose not to work. and absolutely have a right to do so. You know, if you want to retire at 55 and play golf all day, that you are absolutely within your right to do so. So nobody is trying to force people to work for longer. What we're saying is that we think there would be a significant number of people who would like to work, but there are too many barriers in place. And if we're able to remove some of those barriers, we could, even if half of that number were true, it would make a significant improvement in the island. But look, to your question, Mark, I think it's who really owns this issue and whose responsibility is it?
Yes, let's talk about some of those barriers, and that might be something you can talk to Blair a little bit about from your experience on the ground there.
Yeah, definitely. I think what I liked about the report is it kind of looks at it as a three-pronged approach. And talking about ownership and the theme a little bit is firstly governance and who the policy writers are behind it. That's obviously important. And then there's other two of taking ownership as a candidate. We call them from a recruitment perspective, or an employee, or someone seeking work, a job seeker, and also the employer themselves, and trying to balance that, what they're seeking and what they're searching for with what employers can offer. And I think you've got to, one of those barriers being flexibility, so time, and actually what we see is you've got a great demographic of really well-skilled and experienced employees or people seeking work that are unable to access roles basically because employers, some, aren't able to be as flexible as that employee would be looking for. And it needs to be fair. I think that's important to add, that it needs to work for what your current demographic and workplace looks like. But there are definitely themes we see on a daily basis of candidates reporting where they are certainly matching a CV to a job description really well when it comes to their skills and experiences. But it's just that time and response being able to offer to that employer. So it could be because of increased caring responsibility, whether that be their own children or grandchildren. But actually, there is that gap, and it's a difficult thing to try and fill and that void. But this is where this conversation awareness is so important, because it needs to start somewhere. And if it can perk a bit of interest in slight change, I think that's kind of that ownership piece of it's really difficult to go, how much can you impact as a sole person, but actually one significant change in one area, a bit of gold standard kind of benchmarking, you can then go, oh, that's worked for some, and it just becomes a bit of an effect. So I think that's what really interests us as recruitment consultants, trying to bridge that gap between candidates and clients and what they're all really looking for, and in essence be successful and support the business need.
Have you seen like a changing trend as well in the last few years?
I think that yes, that it's a really difficult market. I think just it's exactly what the figures are telling us, but there are some brilliantly skilled people on the island and across Guernsey and Jersey. So it is finding that flexibility, and I think one thing that we certainly really want to champion is networking, communication, is giving someone the opportunity. It takes a short amount of time to have that one really exciting and nurturing conversation that opportunity might grow from. Whereas I think a lot of maybe recruitment processes are very linear and follow a pathway of, does that CV match the skills and experiences that person has? Actually, there's so much more to that person through lived experience, through personality, that we spend a lot of time when engaging with our candidates, learning about them. So we do that initial talent acquisition and exposure on a personality level. So actually building that relationship with a client to be able to demonstrate that and get in with the hiring managers and teams to go, actually, yes, no one can do a job 100% correct at any given time. So there's always going to be areas of development. And I think at different levels of that person's career, professional development or age, you learn and pick up different skills as you grow, and everyone develops at their own pace. So you are going to get at the early end of someone's career someone who is brilliantly educated and really engaged in professional life. They probably go through maybe a shift because they need caring responsibility, but actually that gives them lived experience. It changes their own biases. And then that brilliant, and you were talking about kind of the older generation here as well, is they have all of those lived experiences and personal skills and softer skills that are so important, and they have the qualifications and skills under their belt. They're just looking for an opportunity to really stick with a company and grow with that company, and probably aren't the positive to that company that takes that chance on them to be flexible. They get mentorships for their junior candidates. That's really important. And mentorship can work in both ways, where juniors can then learn and teach others in maybe talking about technology as an example. And it just creates that more holistic workforce that comes from different experiences. It will then mirror what their own clients look like and the skills and experiences they're talking about. So I think it's just, for me, it's about connection, it's about networking, and it's about building that skill set at all levels. And really is what success comes from.
And are employers open to flexibility? And also, I'm thinking a bit here as well about taking on staff who may be older and more experienced. Is there a fear of doing that in some ways as well?
I think there can be. To sort of say, we've got some brilliant employers on the island that really pride themselves on flexibility. And I think that's really important to say as well. And there's lots of learning that can be shared. And I think when you look at benefits or additional perks of each company, there's lots of cross-examining and learning and trying to keep up with the current trends. So I think that's really important, I'd say, compared to the UK. We are doing that really well on the island. Is there a shift in terms of how that could be better still? I think what probably happens is you learn from mistakes or change. So I think as people leave a business, you then maybe evolve that decision making and then go, okay, in a year's time, we're going to maybe change this. But actually, that communication internally in a company is so important, where you've got a workforce that if you can really build that trust with them, grow the decision making internally with that team, they feel part of that journey and feel part of the decision making, so they want to stay and want to then grow with that business. I think what you then see is if they feel left out from that, or they feel that they weren't part of that decision making and maybe it was made at an executive level, people then kind of go, okay, well, I don't feel valued here, so where will I go? And it isn't maybe losing that skill set as we're talking about in terms of the economically disengaged groups, but actually their skill set's getting lost from that company. So then they evolve their decision making, go, okay, we need to learn from that. But I think it's important that if you want to maintain people being engaged, it's how do we involve them at all levels of a business in terms of communication and decision making.
I do think there's a bit of unconscious bias, though, of employers when it comes to older people. I've done it myself. You know, I was hiring for a role and seen a lot of CVs come through of people over 50. And initially, I was kind of overqualified, put them all to one side. They're too experienced. You know, he's been a CEO of this, she was a CFO of that. This is a lower level role. But actually, having done this work, realising that there are a lot of people of a certain age that just want to continue working, feel they have more to give, but don't want to do the high pressure role. They've done that, but now they want to continue working. And so it made me go back and take that pile back and look at them with different eyes. And I do think that a lot of employers have that mindset of this person's too senior for this role. But so that's where the conversation around, you know, what is it you're looking for? And, you know, leverage that experience that you're getting for a kind of bargain price. Why wouldn't you?
I'd like to add to that, you know, everything that's just been said here. And I think we have to embrace these generational differences and bridge the gap and find ways of doing that, because every generation brings its own gifts. And we can so often say, oh, this is the right way, or they're out of date, or we don't do things around here like that anymore, you know, and we need to embrace those differences. We all bring the gifts to the table. And I'd also like to pick up on the communication piece as well that you were talking about, Blair, is that's absolutely the foundation stone for so much. And it's so underestimated in organisations, and the way that people are employed, the way people are working on a day-to-day basis, the way they're involved, the way they're connected with on a day-to-day basis. Communication is so much more than just talking, isn't it? It's about how you connect, and the empathy, the listening, the building the understanding, how people ask questions and asking great questions to get to the bottom of something. Great communication could just be someone asking one great question. That might be it, but that's been great communication. It's not all about talking. And it's helping people to build these skills. And so often companies are not building on this communication piece. And everything else is built upon that. Communication is the foundation stone for great leadership, for connection, for learning new skills, for receiving feedback, for giving feedback. There's so much is built on that skill.
And do you think that there's a changing landscape there as well? With a modern workplace, and it's different to what it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I'm particularly thinking as well for young people coming in, their expectations are going to be different.
Yes, and I think it's really healthy if young people come in and ask the question, why do we do things this way? Does that still apply today? And there's no fear around that. And I think the younger generations have less fear about asking these questions. And it's healthy because very often a company might say, well, we've always done it like that. But actually, that's a great question. Why do we do it? Does that still apply? And so I think, yes, young people can come in and freshen up the place and bring in new ideas. And it doesn't have to be a threat.
Well, to move back a bit, talking about that ownership issue that you all raised, to be honest. So where does the responsibility sit? I mean, is it a government level? Is it a individual business level? Is it more? Is it?
All
I
of
mean,
us.
it's going to be all of this.
Yes, I think each and every one of us needs to play our part. We're all cogs in a big wheel. And if we all set somebody else's role to do this, things will never get done. They'll get pushed aside. We all have to take responsibility for our bit and look within our sphere of influence to see what could we do, what is possible for us to do to improve things, to change things, to overcome this issue. And government level, for them to actually decide, okay, things are discussed, but where's the ownership? How can this be taken forward? What commitment can be made to do that?
Yeah, I think sort of building on that, I think it's, I would say first and foremost, probably for government to set the vision and the strategy. It's like, we see this as, it's an ageing population, but we want it to be an island of lifelong learning. We want it to be an island where people can fully participate, whether that's third sector or in the world of work, for as long as possible. And that there's the support infrastructure, the policies, the incentives to enable that to happen. So my view is it kind of starts with that signalling from government. I think that's really important. Then it's absolutely about, okay, so what does businesses need to do to respond to that? And how can businesses be more open-minded, be more inclusive to some of the things Blair was talking about, to be open to and encourage that participation. And then I think thirdly, us as citizens, we've got to be thinking, if I'm going to live a 100-year life, which is kind of what we talk about when we look kind of 20, 30 years hence. I think a child born today has a 50% chance of living to 100 years old. So if we're going to live for 100 years, we've got to take responsibility for our own health, our well-being, our careers, our housing, our finances. We can't just be expecting that government is going to sort all that out for us over a certain age. So I think as an island, what they did in New Zealand that was so powerful was they really set that ambition of why would you retire early? Why wouldn't you want to keep participating? And it was a cultural shift and it was really successful. And they saw that actually from people working longer, it actually led to better health outcomes as well. So there were so many benefits, but that's how they did it. And I think we should look to do something similar.
How did they bring about that cultural shift though? And it almost, I don't know if I've got this right, but it almost feels like we might still have the mentality that was there 20 years ago or something, like you retire at 65, you take out your pension and that's it. But everything has shifted. We're living longer. We're hopefully living longer, more healthy as well. And we have the opportunities to do that. So is there a mismatch between sort of where our culture is and where it needs to get to?
I think there is. I mean, when people were retiring at 60, 65, their life expectancy probably wasn't 100. So I think that's the thing now, due to, advances in medicine and healthcare, people are living longer. But we haven't really adjusted the mindset around retirement to match that. And in New Zealand, they did a huge undertaking of engaging with the community. Everything from going into pubs, community centres, they really engaged with the community. What would hold you back from working longer? What incentives would encourage you to work for longer? They engaged a lot with the media and got the media to change the imagery around older people and older citizens, because maybe some of the imagery they were using before was kind of a particular kind of type of older person. They looked at other countries that had success with various tax policy and other incentives, and they looked to say, right, well, how can we mirror some of that? How can we make sure we've got a good regulatory framework to support this? So it really was a very kind of holistic view at the whole thing, but it was a cultural movement. And we spoke to the lady who created this program for New Zealand, and she said, now it's the position where people say, why would I retire? Why would I not be working? It's just kind of ingrained now in the DNA of the country.
Because culture is all about values and beliefs, isn't it? It's often people think of culture as religion or nationality, and it's all about our values and beliefs. And if we can embrace those values and beliefs, that's when we can really have change and make a massive shift.
You would feel like Guernsey should be really well placed to enact that kind of cultural shift. We're a small island, we're well connected. Like that feels like a good environment for that to happen. Do you think?
Yeah, and I think it definitely is. It's kind of going back a step in the conversation again. It's about that connection and collaboration. It's kind of been a theme that's been touched upon, where how do our states members, the committees, engage with the kind of civil servants to get the right information for all the surveys they put out, or and you're trying to access the key information to get that accurate. Is we're talking about disengaged groups. They're also the groups that are going to be really difficult to engage with. What do you value? What are your beliefs? What are you looking for? So it sounds like New Zealand have done it expertly, where they've managed to go into the real community groups of actually, what do you think? And that gives a more accurate indication of what do they need. So then you kind of put that up the chain again in terms of incentives. What do employers need to shift on? And the tax incentives around, if you are engaged. I think it was actually just today in the UK, they've discussed incentives for young job seekers. For if you've been searching for 6 months and you're actively engaged, there's now incentives of monetary value to say, okay, keep going. It just keeps you engaged. I think, I'm not saying that's what we need to do, but it's an example of there is small shifts you can do that you might get a small number of those more economically engaged again, and that's only a good thing.
And I think that comes down to communication again, doesn't it? It's like, how do you influence that? And influence is often about, listening to people, pulling people, listening to their views, them feeling involved. And when people feel involved, that can create a great shift in culture. It's when people don't feel involved, they just sit back and let others get on with it and fix it. And if we can improve this communication, build people's confidence, reduce fear around that, so people feel that it's safe to give their opinions and to get involved, then I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and utilising that network, like you said, Guernsey is a really close community with a great spirit. You've got our financial services are really heavily working closely in funding our third sectors, and then they have your links into education and different private sectors and public sectors as well. So there's the people there that are part of the workforce that are engaged and do have those links into the community. It's just how do we bring those together, or I think one of the calls was maybe a centralised group that can kind of govern all of that. That certainly answers the accountability piece of if you've got like-minded people governing that, driving it forward, creating that strategy, it can only get good results, or at least start that journey. I think that's so important.
Have you seen any reaction? Because you mentioned that in the report, there was talk about like having a central group there, wasn't there? Has that been picked up?
Yeah, so we've had some conversations with various different people. I think everyone thinks it's a good idea. I think it's just, whose responsibility is it and where does this sit? And I think that's part of the problem. It's, is this about economic development? Is this about education? Is this policy and resources? And I think that that has kind of got in the way a bit. I think everyone we spoke to has been very positive, very receptive, but I think it's almost like you need something to sit, kind of separately from those different committees, because this is a kind of cross-committee thing. There's another point really that I think is a very important one, and that is technology. So, AI is disrupting our workforce in a way that I've never seen in my career. We have people stepping out for parental leave for 6 months, coming back and saying, I'm lost. What so much has happened just in that period of time. So if you've got people who've been out of work, maybe on career breaks or retired early and now want to come back, it's a really daunting prospect to be coming back into the world of work that we're now in, even if you've only been out for a couple of years. And I think that confidence point is not to be underestimated, as kind of Korinne's touched on that as well. So it was really pleasing to see the adult skills strategy and the team that have done a fantastic job on that, and digital skills is at the heart of that. So, so we have seen some progress, and I think that digital skills strategy is a great example. And I know, that their programs that they're running for people on digital skills are oversubscribed. So it shows that there's demand there. But I think, we'd need to be looking at doing stuff like that on an even bigger scale, because that technology piece cannot be underestimated.
It's so important. Do you see that in terms of the roles changing and expectations for those roles changing?
Yes, in some. I think again, it's very difficult to kind of give a definitive answer on that, because it's dependent on the size of the business, the budget of the business, and some are able to really put lots of effort into technology and the advancements of that, and actually having someone with the key unique skills to govern that within a business. But actually something on the lower level is then training, is just upskilling someone enough. And if your business is using it in certain ways, let's just give those people the foundations, if you like, of what they need to understand to do their job effectively and well. And also there's opportunity where, and again, this would be very much generalising, maybe a younger generation that maybe do have a bit more technology minded, can mentor others returning to the workplace, or those that are more senior in age and just need that teaching in a certain way. And that, again, just builds that connection and ability to work together.
Absolutely, I agree.
I mean, I guess I'm thinking a little bit looking forward now as well, since you brought AI into the conversation. That's obviously going to change the workplace quite dramatically, potentially. Are we prepared for that?
Are we prepared? That's a big question. I think all businesses are grappling with AI, and our CEO survey that's just come out shows that, even companies in big organisations are still struggling to see the return on the productivity that they hoped AI would bring. So I think every business is still in that experimental implementation phase. But there's no question, as we see almost on a daily basis, the developments in that space are mind-blowing. So I think it'd be naive to think that we will continue as we are for too much longer. I do think there's big change on the way. Do I think Guernsey companies are prepared for that change? I think they could be doing more to prepare for that change. I'm still of the view that you need people. I'm still of the view that client-customer relationships rely on good person-to-person contact, but there's no question, AI, automation, technology generally will dramatically change the way that we do work, and therefore upskilling, to Blair's point, our existing staff as well as new people coming into the business ought to be kind of table stakes, so you can't be expecting schools, adult education to do the upskilling as a business. You need to commit the funding and investment to make sure that you're continually investing in that upskilling.
And I guess that again, when we're talking about workforce participation and how important it is, that would be a concern if you're, like you brought that example out where you've been out of the workforce for 6 months and you come back and all of a sudden half your job's automated or something. But potentially, it's just as an example. Do you get any experience of that from directly?
Yes, when I'm working with companies, because I offer training and coaching to companies, and they're very often highlighting these challenges that people are facing, but also it's when you really drill down to what the real issues are, a lot of it is often about confidence, about well-being, about communication, about upskilling. So it boils down to all of the things we've been speaking about today. And it's interesting because when you think about the generation beta, the children that are now being born, they're being born with AI as the norm. So within their generation, AI is going to be the norm to them. To the younger generations, like generations X and Y, social media was the norm. And so we're all evolving, all changing. And so it's about adaptability and helping people develop those skills and helping them to know how to ask the right questions, to find out the information they need to know, and about building that sense of well-being and taking away, as I mentioned before, that fear factor about it, because technology doesn't mean it's taking the job. What it's going to do is it's actually going to enhance their job because as Leyla said, the people skills can't be replaced by AI. There's always a role for people, and people will always want that connection with other people. And so it's about knowing where AI can be used as a really valuable tool in addition to the skills that we offer. And the more people upskill themselves, the more they are going to be valuable. Yeah. So there's the value in the people side that AI cannot do. Well, not yet anyway. Who knows? But certainly at this moment in time, we need to be developing those skills more importantly than ever.
Because I guess, even when you wrote the report, AI was in a very different place to where it is now. And when you're looking at barriers and opportunities, I guess, is there any plans to refresh this as well, or was that?
Well, the report it takes quite a long time and a big investment to do these reports. So I think when the previous version of this was a Women in Work report that we did 3 times. And I think it's around, would we have something new to say? So if I were to run that again and go through the data, it would be saying the same thing. So I think that is as valid as it was 12 months ago and will still be valid in 12 months' time. The question really is the action and what comes next. And do we think that this is an opportunity for Guernsey? And if we do, how can we harness the right people together to make it happen?
It was a similar message came out of the finance strategy presentation the other day. We're in the phase where we need to be moving to action, and you've got the evidence base there, haven't you? And you know why you need to do it. So maybe it's about getting it done now. Any final messages as well?
I think we all agreed that it's about taking action. We had a conversation before and we all agreed that it's about, we all need to take action. We all need to take responsibility and accountability for our part in the bigger picture. And I think that's a key message that's come through for me today. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of my main points has been networking and taking opportunities, whether that be at a citizen level, is not giving up. If you aren't able to find a job, we are available, recruiters are there. Building that network of people, you don't know where that conversation can go and when opportunity can come by. And there's always, in anyone's career, there's going to be points of disappointment. So I think it is just staying motivated. And that's, I think, an important point. And on an employer level, happy to network and again, understand their business needs and bridge that gap.
I think for me, the 3 audiences, look, government, have another look at this again. It's an opportunity for the island. It's, we're on a growth agenda with the current states. This is an opportunity for growth. have a look at it again. How could we make this work across government? For businesses, I think it's being more open-minded, really question your workforce strategy and your people model. Could you do things differently? Could you be a bit more open-minded? Could you be a bit more flexible? And then for islanders, start thinking about your 100-year life. Start thinking that you're not too old to get back into work, to contribute to the island, to be economically active. And let's have that discussion at a community level, because I think it's a really important one and it's a positive one as well.
Thank you all for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. If you've got all this way, I'm really hoping that you've enjoyed our work. There's a few things you can do, though, to support us. Follow, like, subscribe, share, whatever you can do to help spread the word of the Quarry. The other thing you can do is head on over to our website, where you can become a member and really support independent local news.